All right. Ready for more, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about nutrition part 2. So yesterday, nutrition part 1, we mostly talked about the building blocks. We called it the bricks, the protein, fat, carbohydrate. Now we're going to talk about how do we put those bricks together to build a house. I didn't get to this yesterday. Yesterday we talked about diet, we talked about exercise, we talked about obesity, right? I would actually, if I was going to have one clinical pointer for practice, now keep in mind this deck, this is not how do I practice. This is not what are the food plans that we use in my practice. This is board review. What do I think are the most important studies that are most likely to appear on the board exam? But in clinical practice, I just went through the 3 banned terms in my clinic. I actually don't use the word diet. That already has a negative connotation for patients. So we prefer what I put up here, eating plan or food plan, healthy eating plan, healthy food plan. We don't use the term exercise. I'm always worried if I say exercise, people go, they exercise right out of my clinic as fast as they can. So we use the word physical activity or joyful movement or something like that. And sorry, it's true. And then we don't use the word obesity, as I'm sure you heard in Dr. Articolo's talk yesterday, that's actually a stigmatizing term. So we'll say, people affected with unhealthy weight or affected by weight or affected by obesity, but we don't use those terms. So again, although this is a talk on diets, maybe we should have said this is a talk on food plans, all right? So when we're talking about our different types of eating plans, really today what we're going to be talking about is how would we structure a food plan for purposes of losing weight. So I would define the food plan, it's the total food that the person eats in a day. And then for weight loss, the diet must be low in energy. And in a couple slides, we'll talk about calories again. But the low energy piece seems to be more important than the macronutrient composition. Should it be low fat or low carb or high calcium or high protein or this or that? There's been a lot in the medical journals about this, including JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. I think it was last year. There was a viewpoint published that said, is it time to end the discussion about macronutrient-controlled diets? And that's an interesting article. I think it was David Ludwig published that one. But at the end of the day, when we look at a lot of the different studies, when we ask a person to eat a certain way, a lot of patients already know that's how I'm supposed to eat. They already know, but then they don't do it. So the more important question is why. I mean, why is the person eating chocolate from 6 p.m. till 10 p.m.? I mean, they know that's causing a problem, and instructing them to substitute out beef jerky and celery, they're not going to do it. They're still going to do the chocolate. So really, when we're talking about food plans, today I'm talking about what are they eating. But in clinical practice, it's more important to figure out why people are eating or when they're eating. It's become my opinion after doing this now for 12 years that a lot of eating behavior, that's what it is. It's behavioral. People get into these rhythms. They get into these patterns. And just telling them to eat different foods, that's usually not effective. Nevertheless, that's what this lecture is about. It's what are going to be the different food plans we could use. Again, there's a million diets. I mean, this talk could go on for the entire conference if we wanted to cover all the different dietary styles that people are using. But I just listed a few. I mean, ad lib, I like to think that's what they're doing now, right? The famous seafood diet. We see it, we eat it. Right? Calorie controlled, hey, I'm trying to count my calories. Macronutrient controlled, I'm trying to eat high protein, I'm trying to eat low carb, I'm doing low carb, high fat. I mean, everybody will tell you what their macronutrients are. Timing, well, I heard that if I eat 15 times a day, I'll lose more weight than if I eat twice a day. Energy density, you remember Barbara Roll's excellent book, Volumetrics. She was from Penn State. In 2005, she published that, and that says, well, if you eat this, Starbucks muffin, you could have the entire salad bar, and it's the same calories. So her book kind of shows you the equivalent energy of different types of foods, glycemic load, and so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about a lot of these different strategies. But at the end of the day, this is all an attempt to get into a low-calorie diet. So some of the diets that we might use for weight loss might be low fat. Is anybody still doing low fat diets? Not one person? All right, so we'll talk about a little bit of the evidence on low fat, low carb, Mediterranean, vegetarian, vegan, and so on and so forth. So in terms of strategies for weight loss, you've all heard about these. You've got calorie-restricted diets. We might call that a balanced deficit diet. Meal replacement is another way to create a calorie deficit. And we use those in medical clinics, but you also see the commercialized weight loss industry. Right, they deliver all of the frozen meals to the person's door, and as long as that's the sum total of the food people eat, they lose weight. So a lot of the commercialized weight loss industry is built on meal replacement. Then we see the macronutrient diets we've talked about, we see the protein-sparing modified fast, which I will talk about, and then special populations, which are really topics for other lectures, including kids. So does anybody in our audience know who came up with the idea that if you lower your calories by 3,500 calories, you'll lose a pound of fat? Do you still tell your patients this? I still hear it all the time. Everybody's plugging into their MyFitnessPal, and it tells them if they get their 3,500 calorie deficit, they should have lost a pound of fat. And then it says, well, because you did 327 calories on the treadmill, and you lowered your calories by 243, and you did this for X number of days, then it says you should have lost 3.725 pounds. Does anybody believe that calorie balance of weight loss still works? So I Googled Max Wishnowsky. It's great to, you should Google these things, it's fun. You'll find the Wikipedia on Max Wishnowsky, who was a sailor who in 1958 was asked by the military to figure out how much should we feed our soldiers overseas so that they won't lose weight. And he came back and did some actually very nice formulas and said, well, a pound of fat has about 3,500 calories in it. And then they based the nutritional recommendations on that. So I still get physicians telling me, well, they just need to eat less, they need to move more, and they'll lose weight. It's just first law of thermodynamics, right? But at the end of the day, we don't really have any good evidence to back that up. But this is kind of where it all started. If you have people giving you flack that it's the 3,500 calorie rule is true, I've included two references for you. The first one is Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics says it's not true. The second is the famous Casaza article. It's called Myths, Presumptions, and Facts About Obesity. If you haven't downloaded that one, it's available in the public domain. And the first myth is if you have a 3,500 calorie deficit, you will not, in fact, lose a pound of fat. That's just not true. For all the reasons that you're learning about in this conference with metabolic adaptation and so on and so forth. So who thinks the best evidence for weight loss is to do low carb? Okay, I see like one hand. Who's awake? Okay, we're awake. So I saw 3 hands for low carb. Who thinks low fat? Who thinks high protein? A couple hands. Who thinks meal replacement? It's actually the best evidence is actually for meal replacement. So we're going to go through some of that data. So in terms of some of these different strategies, remember yesterday we talked about the AMDR, the acceptable macronutrient distribution ratio. So if you fall on the fringe or outside of the AMDR, then it would be a macronutrient controlled diet. So for example, low carbohydrate, remember the carbohydrates 45 to 65% was the AMDR for carbohydrates. So for less than 45%, that's going to be a low carb diet. And I know there's different definitions. I saw in some of the speaker slides yesterday some slightly different definitions. But nevertheless, that's what we're after. Similarly, low fat, less than 20%. Low GI, we'll talk about Mediterranean, we'll talk about paleo. We've had some great lectures on paleo in previous conferences. If we didn't have it 10,000 years ago, we shouldn't be eating it. How many of your patients come in and they say, I'm doing paleo? That's really popular right now, right? And so then I usually ask where they're getting their insects from. It's true. If you read about the paleo diets, 5 to 10% of the diet was insect. So I say, okay, so you're not really doing paleo. And then I ask them if they're catching their own food. So when we talk about Mediterranean diet and we talk about paleo diet, isn't it really more of a lifestyle? I mean, cavemen didn't sit in front of the internet for 22 hours a day. I mean, we laugh, but there's some seriousness to that. I mean, a Mediterranean-style diet, I really think that the lifestyle is more important than just the choice of foods, right? There's more rest, there's more sleep, there's less information superhighway. There's more emphasis on quality of life. There's more emphasis on quality of ingredients, right? Take the Italians, take Tuscan cuisine, Tuscan bread, right? The Tuscan bread doesn't have any salt because they didn't have any salt. That's why it's Tuscan bread. You come here and you have Tuscan bread, and it's like layers of flavors, right? You're going to eat the whole loaf. You can't stop. It's addictive. But in Italy, there's a slow food movement. So they were tired of fast food, so they have slow food. So you sit down, and it's 25 minutes before they bring you water. And, you know, dinner takes 4 hours. And the portions are small, but there are a lot of times ingredients that the restaurants grew themselves. There might only be 3 ingredients. Contrasted to Olive Garden, where 20 minutes in, you've already had 37 breadsticks because they're free. All right, where are we? Sorry. I keep going off on tangents, but it's true. I mean, in America, we kind of warp all these things, right? So taking a dietary history, there was a lot presented on this yesterday, but briefly, I would know what a 24-hour dietary recall is, I would know what a food record is, and I would know what a food frequency questionnaire is. Honestly, in typical practice, I saw an interesting study, you know, patients who journal do better than patients that don't. I saw one study, patients that would do a food journal 1 day a week did better than patients that didn't journal at all. So if I can even get a patient to fill out a food journal on Monday and bring that in, it can help them establish routines. So low-calorie diets, and typically this is anything under 1,500 calories and above 800 calories. And again, lots of different ways to do it. You know, we have point systems, like a Weight Watchers is a point system, right? Portion-controlled, meal replacements, low-fat, low-carb, paleo, South Beach, Mediterranean. At the end of the day, these are all, I think, going to fall under that umbrella of just trying to be a low-carb diet. A lot of people say the low-carb diets don't work. People just regain the lost weight. But this is a study where we looked at a subset of the intensive lifestyle intervention participants in Look Ahead. Remember, Look Ahead was the trial looking at patients with type 2 diabetes doing more of a lifestyle treatment instead of just medical treatment. And this is looking at a subgroup of patients, you can see it in the title, that had lost at least 10% at the first year and then following them out for 8 years. So you see here they are at 1 year and they've lost, that's the quartile that lost greater than 10%. And if you follow this curve out, you can see that 40% actually kept most of that weight off. 40%. And actually, if you look at these two groups, 65% were keeping off clinically significant weight, and only a very small percentage, 14%, were actually above where they had started 8 years ago. I mean, what does that tell me? It tells me intensive lifestyle intervention works. I mean, this is not medication. This is ILI. And that's why in a lot of our practices, you know, I gauge the intensity of treatment by the number of office visits completed in the first year, right? So in our practice, again, not for board review purposes, I call it intensive if we can get up to 26 or 28 visits in the first year. And usually the first 20 of those are in the first 6 months. So it's not unusual that we'll do weekly counseling or classes or meet with a dietitian for 3 to 4 months. Then we'll go every other week up to 6 months, and then usually we're going monthly out to 1 year. So we'll grade the intensity as high intensity, medium intensity, or low intensity, really based on the number of visits attended. And I haven't been able to show that that correlates well with weight loss at the first 6 months, but these data really suggest it's going to correlate well with maintenance of that weight loss. Those visits are primarily behavioral driven, trying to put behaviors in place that are going to help people stay on track. This is also from Look Ahead. This was the 1 year study. You've already seen some of these graphs again from previous speakers, but showing that individuals that attended all of the recommended visits in the intensive lifestyle intervention group had the highest weight loss at a year. All right, so we're going to talk about macronutrient composition of diets. I apologize, I'm going to give you some conflicting studies because, you know, one study might show you one thing and then the next study contradicts it. nevertheless, this is a study of 811 overweight adults looking at various macronutrient compositions, low fat, low carb, high carb, and so on and so forth. And then on the next slide, and I'm sorry because all the dots are small and it's really hard to read, but my interpretation of this is 4 diets, no difference. They're all the same. Doesn't matter, low carb, low fat, high fat. Everybody lost a little bit of weight, 10 pounds, but not much. And then there was usually a quick reversion back to previous way of eating. Then there was the famous Danziger study. I'd be surprised if this one does not show up on the board exams. And this got a lot of press. It was very famous, 2005, Journal of the American Medical Association, showing this impressive 2-kilogram weight loss. 2 kilograms for patients on Atkins, which is low carb, Zone, Weight Watchers, and Ornish, which is low fat. So you kind of have Atkins, low carb, Ornish, low fat, and then the 2 in between. So the journal report said they all work the same. I mean, my summary of this would be they all did nothing. And I mean, what did the patients really do? And so the interesting piece is if you look in each group, here's some people that gained weight on Atkins, and here's some people that lost a lot of weight on Atkins, right? So there's a real big variability. I mean, look at this on Ornish. This person's losing a ton of weight. This person's gaining weight. And so that average line is pretty unimpressive. And on this line, what they're showing is that as the compliance, so they gauged compliance with the diet, as the compliance with the diet increased, the weight loss increased. So again, my take on this is that there wasn't very good compliance. Most people, they did their Atkins for a week, and then they went back to how they ate. You guys all know about the Resolutions weight loss program, right? So that's getting real big in Colorado. So they have a weight loss center a gym. So you're going to the gym to lose weight, right? And they have every piece of equipment you could ever possibly need. They've got the bench press and the treadmills and the newest everything. So you go there and you can do anything you want, but that's only for 2 weeks. And then all the equipment gets moved out and they turn it into a bar. It's the Resolutions weight loss program. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. But Chris Gardner from Stanford, Chris Gardner came back and he said, I don't believe this. He said, what if we repeated this study, but we actually got people to be compliant with the food plans? What if we really, really went after higher compliance? In that case, would there be a difference between the low carb and the low fat and the in-between groups? And you can see this was published just a couple years later. He called it the A to Z diet study. That was again published in Journal of American Medical Association. And this was one of our earlier studies that actually showed, whoa, look at this. Atkins actually outperformed the other 3. So this was one of the earlier studies suggesting that low carb might be a better dietary strategy when it comes to reducing the weight. All right, low-fat diets, they're going to be 20 to 30% fat. Ornish was an example of that. Usually less than 10% saturated fat, low cholesterol, low LDL. These are still recommended. Looks like I should have corrected this slide. No. American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, a lot of organizations still recommending low fat. Remember the MyPlate.org? I'm not even sure if that's still going. I should have Googled. Is MyPlate.org still going? Yeah, people say yeah. So I love this. This is so helpful to my patients. Enjoy your food, but eat less. I mean, less than what? Just eat the 1 Twinkie instead of 2 Twinkies? Avoid oversized portions. Have you ever seen an undersized portion in America? So what's that? Avoid eating out. Foods to increase. Make half your plate fruits and vegetables. So they'll use this in the school system, but the school system, they got upset with the 5210 recommendation. The food industry lobbied Congress that they were having trouble getting the right amount of fruits and vegetables. So Congress said, okay, well, frozen pizza is a vegetable. So that's tomato sauce. So half the plate then needs to be pizza. I don't know. It's kind of strange. Grains, whole grains, switch to low-fat or fat-free milk. Where's the evidence that low-fat dairy has a benefit? But that's still in our recommendations. So we can argue about all that, but nevertheless, that's myplate.org. Drink water instead of sugary drinks. Okay, I like that one at the bottom. We've got vegetarian and vegan diets are typically real low-fat diets, but most of my patients are not vegan. Most of my patients, are pescatarian or lacto-ovo, so know those terms that they may eat dairy-made eggs, made fish. Protein sources I reviewed. Vegans, no animal products, so there's more risk for nutritional deficiencies, especially B12, and a lot of purported health benefits. Weight loss can lower certain risks of cancers, can lower LDL, can decrease diabetes risk, and can even improve glycemic control. A lot of folks that I'm working with aren't vegetarians, but we're trying to move towards more plant-based diets, right? Eating more real food. So that's another movement we're seeing. Mediterranean diet, again, I already talked about maybe it needs to be Mediterranean lifestyle, walking instead of driving your car, taking a siesta in the afternoon, growing your own food. Nevertheless, and there's not really the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean is a large region, and there's a lot of different styles that might be used for a Mediterranean style of diet. But these are typically higher in fat. Your fat source, somebody asked me yesterday about olive oil, right? That's going to be one of the primary fat sources in a Mediterranean diet. Nuts, legumes, monounsaturated fats, that's where the olive oil is going to come in. Fish, seafood, moderate alcohol, that's the one my patients like. Remember, that's a glass of wine for women or 2 glasses of wine for men. And no, they can't have all 7 drinks on Friday night. The PREDIMED study, that's a really interesting one where they found a 30% lowering in the risk of the first cardiovascular event and a 40% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And then the Lyon heart study, which showed a really significant drop in the risk of recurrent coronary heart disease. Then there's the famous SHI study where they had patients either on the low-carb diet, the low-fat diet, or the Mediterranean style of food plan. And what we saw is on the low-carb diet, they had a pretty nice weight loss over 6 months. And this is a pretty typical weight loss curve, right? When you look at all the diet studies, people lose weight for 6 or 7 months, and then they regain some of it by 12 months. If they don't regain, usually by 12 months, we're lucky if we hold on. Most people don't lose additional weight from 6 to 12 months. It's important to be able to talk about that with patients, because how many of your patients feel like they've reached their weight loss goal at 6 months? And it doesn't matter how much they've lost. Everybody wants to lose a bunch more. That's not typical for what happens. Here we saw the low-fat diet, and here we saw the Mediterranean diet, but they ended up at the same place without that rebound. So that's a real nice study showing a Mediterranean diet about as effective as a low-carb diet. Is anybody doing glycemic index types of food plans with their patients? I think a lot of doctors still like to talk about this. This was really popularized by the South Beach diet book, what was that, about 10 years ago. And so glycemic index, this is how much and how quickly does your blood glucose go up after you're exposed to XYZ food. And the high glycemic index foods are going to raise the blood sugar more than the low glycemic index foods. I've given you the scale in terms of what's low, medium, and high. And glycemic load would be how much of the food is there. So, for example, glycemic load, 3 apples would be raising the blood sugar more than 1 apple. Make sense? Keep in mind the glycemic index is variable. Just because South Beach has the tables of the glycemic index of what a carrot is and what the apple is and what the applesauce is, how the food is prepared, the ripeness, other foods eaten with it, a person's age, a person's other medications, they all affect it. So it's not a perfect science. I dug up one interesting study on glycemic index, and what this is showing, and I apologize, when I first looked at this study, it's gobbledygook. So let me explain what I see in this, other than just a bunch of dotted, solid-colored lines. This line down here is high protein, low glycemic index. This is patients that had lost 8% body weight, and the high protein, low GI was the only group in this study that kept the weight off. So high protein, low glycemic index in this study seemed to be really helpful for maintenance of weight loss. Low carbohydrate diet, so we're controlling the total amount of carbohydrate. Honestly, in clinical practice, we do this a lot. Instead of counting calories, a lot of times we'll count carbohydrates. And so patients say, they've lost 50 pounds and they talk to the dietitian, it's Thanksgiving, what should I eat for Thanksgiving? And the dietitian, a lot of times she'll say, well, what's your favorite? What's the favorite starch that's going to be served? And they'll say it's the sweet potatoes. And she'll say, okay, have a portion of that, but let's not do all the other starches that are being served. So they'll control portions in that way. But carbohydrate amounts controlled, refined carbohydrates eliminated, lowers insulin, zone, South Beach, diabetic diet, very low calorie diets. Remember, if the carbs are getting below 50 grams, it's going to be a ketogenic diet. I've seen different numbers reported on that. I've seen less than 70 grams as a ketogenic diet. And in the old style ketogenic diets, we'd go as low as 20 or 25 grams. I don't do that anymore because of a study I'll show you in a couple slides. But typically less than 50 grams, they're going to be in ketosis. And if more than 25% of your protein, of your total calories is from protein, we would call that a high protein diet. Guidelines from the Joslin Diabetes Center. Let's talk a little bit about very low calorie diets. A VLCD, or a very low calorie diet, is typically a diet that's less than 800 calories a day. There's a lot of formulas out there. There's a lot of different vendors that can basically pre-package a VLCD. So you're going to have these 4 shakes and these 2 bars, and that's going to give you all the macro and micronutrients that you're going to need. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be what we call a protein-sparing modified fast. That's going to be eating lean meat, fish and fowl, a few salad items, non-starchy vegetables, but then getting rid of all of the other carbohydrates. And a third way to do it would be to combine those two. So for example, you do lean meat, fish and fowl, non-starchy vegetables, and a couple meal replacements. Actually, we do that because it lets me put the carbohydrates right at 50 grams, which we found to be very effective, and it gives us the additive weight loss effect of partial meal replacement and the nutritional supplementation from the meal replacement. So there's different ways you can do this if you want to in practice. And after I show you the next couple slides, you may not want to. But typically, we're going higher on the protein to prevent lean body weight loss, 75 to 105 grams a day. The recommendation, and this is coming out of Westman and Steelman's text, would be 1.5 grams per kilogram ideal body weight for men and 1.2 grams per kilogram ideal body weight for women. Carbohydrates 50 to 100 grams, fats 10 to 20 grams. Remember, if we do it with no fat, which a lot of my dietitians like to do, and I have to talk them out of it, you're going to raise the risk that they'll get gallstone. So you want to have a little bit of fat in there to stimulate that gallbladder so it doesn't sludge up and they end up with a gallbladder crisis towards the second half of their weight loss program. Complications, gastrointestinal, mostly, honestly, on VLCD, mostly what I see is constipation. People can get pretty constipated on these. People get cold intolerance, people can get dizziness, fatigue, skin, hair, nail changes, amenorrhea, psychiatric issues, electrolyte imbalance. If you're going real low on the carbohydrates, you really got to monitor the potassium. If you're going low enough, you have to add potassium supplementation. I don't recommend that. We did used to do that. That was popular when I was getting into this field, that we take the carbohydrates all the way down to 20 milligrams a day. At 20 milligrams a day, it took 40 milliequivalents of potassium daily for the potassium not to drop, right? If I got the carbs up to about 30 grams a day, we needed 20 milliequivalents of potassium. These days, if we can get the carbs above 50, I found that we generally don't need to add potassium. So it's my practice not to use a food plan where I have to put them on potassium, right? If I do, I raise the carbohydrates a little bit. So that ketosis effect can really leach out the carbohydrates. Gout attacks, especially right when they're initiated, more common in men. Gallstones, heart arrhythmias. If we're doing very low-calorie diets, we monitor EKG and we monitor the QTC. So are they more effective? Should we be doing them? I would know this study. I would flag this one. I would pull it and read it. This was Tom Wadden out of University of Pennsylvania. He's probably the lead author on half the studies we show in this course. But this is a quote: very low-calorie diets did not produce greater long-term weight loss than low-calorie diets. In the United States, the use of liquid meal replacements as part of a 1,000 to 1,500 calorie a day diet may provide an effective and less expensive alternative to VLCD. And that was published in 2005, is it? No, 2006. I mean, we saw a lot of people start moving away from the VLCDs towards more of a low-calorie diet. Do the VLCDs work? I mean, yes, we've used them in practice for a long time. Do they take off more weight than a traditional low-calorie diet? No. In my practice, I've tracked everything that we do. We've had all of our patients electronically now for the past 3 years, so I've got several thousand patients where we've had them either on VLCD or I've had them on meal replacement but not VLCD. My practice shows that the meal replacement non-VLCD actually gives us better weight loss than the VLCD. So someday I'll give you a talk on that and present all my data. But my data would agree with what Dr. Wadden published back in 2006. Now, interestingly, if we go back a few years before that, 1997, Dr. Wadden published an alternative viewpoint, which is that the OF52, which was a VLCD, is similarly effective as invasive treatment options for obesity like banding or vertical gastroplasty. So he flip-flopped his recommendation in those 9 years. So back in 1997, he suggested that we thought that VLCDs were as effective as bariatric surgery. 2006, he did not agree with that. So there is some conflicting evidence if you go through the literature. Meal replacements, isocaloric energy-restricted meal replacements for 2 meals a day provide greater weight loss than diets composed of conventional foods. That's from the ADA, Journal of the American Dietetic Association. Similarly, in weight maintenance, a lot of times it's recommended to do 1 meal replacement a day. You know, there's a lot of question, what's a meal replacement? I mean, in our clinic, usually a meal replacement is going to be something that has protein in it that's prepackaged. Yesterday we talked about Greek yogurt. I mean, that makes a great meal replacement. We'll have them do a Greek yogurt, usually about 12 grams of protein. A lot of the meal replacements that are sold commercially to physicians will have more like 160 calories, and they might have 15-gram protein, 20-gram carb, and that'll be a protein drink or a protein bar. But I'll let people use anything over the counter as a meal replacement that's a fixed quantity that has protein in it. I mean, I think we're putting the string cheese business, we're keeping them going in my clinic. We do a lot of string cheese. We do a lot of things like dill pickles. People, they do real well with the added electrolytes and help so they don't get woozy or lightheaded while they're losing weight. I think my patients buy a lot of turkey pepperoni because they get, I think the dietitians say you can have 17, I don't know how they came up with 17, but they say you can have 17 pieces. I don't know of anybody that could sit down and eat 17 slices of turkey pepperoni, right? So they never even get up to the portion. So the registered dietitians are really good at finding structured ways that the patients can work in foods where they're not having to weigh and measure and prepare, and they're ready to go. They're shelf stable. They can take them on the airplane if they're traveling. So real helpful. Partial meal replacement produces greater weight loss than just trying to count the calories. Weight loss doubled compared to traditional plans, and portion and calorie controlled. We can use them as a full meal replacement, or most of my patients, if we're using meal replacement, we're doing a partial. Again, remember I said yesterday I'm asking patients to eat 5 times a day, right? Breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, then sometimes another snack. So a lot of the patients, if you actually do that food frequency questionnaire, the meal patterns, people don't eat all day and then they eat from 6 o'clock on, right? And you see this all the time, and breakfast is coffee. So a lot of times we'll do meal replacement for everything they're skipping. So the people will be like, I don't want to do any of the meal replacement. I'll be like, well, okay, well, then I want you to cook 6 times a day. Well, what meal replacements are we talking about? And so we'll say, yeah, we really want you to actually put it on a timer and eat every few hours. And people find that to be very helpful. Again, there was data in Look Ahead on the next slide that I'll show you. I'm making a statement here. First year, exercise, I guess I'm supposed to say physical activity. I've got to fix my slide, right? Attendance at treatment sessions and use of meal replacements showed the highest correlation with weight reduction. And again, the same as the other slide. I love showing this one, the patients. This is showing 11% weight loss. This is 608 meal replacements in the first year. So if you do the math, that's about 2 a day. So in the meal replacement group, and they were using things like Slim Fast shakes and that type of thing that they bought over the counter, versus this group which really is using, a couple meal replacements a week. So when it's part of the daily routine, and I think this is where that number 2 a day came from, it really did seem to enhance that 1-year weight loss number. The next slide's famous. Again, I would highlight this one. This one shows up everywhere. Another Wadden study back from 2001. I like to say that this illustrates that multi-component treatment is key, so that if you think about your treatment plan as the legs on a chair, you've got office visits, you've got meal replacements, you've got physical activity, I would put medication on there, so on and so forth. So in the top group, this was done with sibutramine. That was Meridia. It's no longer on the market, but I think this is still clinically relevant. So they showed that when you added intensive lifestyle intervention, you more than doubled the weight loss. And then when you added meal replacement, that's how they ended up with about 16.5% weight loss in this study, which is a number a lot of my patients are starting to get more comfortable with. In terms of the energy density, I gave you the reference here. It's the volumetrics eating plan, and there's been several follow-up books that Barbara Rolls has published. But that the energy density is the amount of energy available for a given weight of food, so kilocalories per gram. And so we're going to emphasize low energy density foods like celery. I think you could eat a whole room full of celery before you had one Starbucks scone, right? So we're going to go for those lower energy density foods. And it allows you to eat a greater volume of foods, even with less calories. Diet and lipids. Weight loss seems to lower total cholesterol, sometimes LDL. Low-carb diets. If any of you have done the real low-carb diets, they're awesome at lowering triglycerides. I mean, triglycerides can go from 600 to normal in a month. It's really awesome to see that. My experience is that usually everything drops on the low-carb diet. All the cholesterol numbers drop. But if you look out 6 or 12 months, you'll see the HDL coming back up. It's very interesting. So low-carb diets seem to raise the HDL compared to low-fat. Just remember that can be a delayed effect. You might not see it on the first month or two. And that low-fat may lower LDL better than low-carb. I think this is conflicting. If you read the studies, especially our new pharmaceutical medications, I quoted Corbimod. That's the, you'll hear about pharmacotherapy, I think, later today, but that's the bupropion-naltrexone combination. In their Corbimod, they took off a lot of weight by doing intensive counseling in conjunction with the medication, and they actually saw a statistically significant rise in the LDL cholesterol. So careful. All your patients are coming and they want to lose weight so they can go off the statin drug. And I don't think that's the primary purpose of weight loss, right? So it's outside of the scope of this lecture, but there are a lot of different dietary therapies that we can use that would manipulate LDL, but we don't necessarily know what's the end result. Is that going to really reduce cardiovascular outcomes? I guess a topic for our lecturers tomorrow is, if we lower the LDL, are we lowering the right thing, right? So we're getting a bunch of lipid talks, and I can't wait to hear what they say about that. I mean, doesn't it seem strange that a person is doing healthy eating, and they're doing exercise, and they're doing intensive behavior modification, and they're on medication, and their LDL is going up? Is that really implying that they're having a higher level of heart risk? I don't think so. So let's check in with our lipidologists in the next couple days. You're all familiar with DASH diet. If you're not, just Google it and you can download it. It's like a 70-page handout. It's very nice. Dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And again, I just listed out for you the components of the DASH diet to have in your reference materials. To me, it looks a lot like a Mediterranean diet. And then a couple summary slides, all right? So if a patient wants to lower their triglycerides and raise their HDL, maybe we do low carb. If they want to lower their total cholesterol and LDL, maybe we do low fat. If they want to lower CV mortality, type 2 diabetes, Mediterranean. If they want to lower LDL, CV mortality, type 2 diabetes, they can become a vegan, right? If they want to lower blood pressure, we could do a DASH diet. If we want to lower the weight, maybe we do meal replacement. VLCD would be the most aggressive dietary strategy that would be used mainly in a specialty medical weight management center. High protein, low glycemic index may be reasonable to keep the weight off that you lost with other methods. And multi-component treatment is key. We don't just do a diet. See, there you got it in 2 slides. Has anybody Googled the new 2015-2020 Dietary Guidelines? Nobody? Come on, one person must have read this. Did you read the whole thing? So these are great. I mean, I think this is going to be terrific for clinical practice, because this tells Americans to follow a healthy eating plan across your lifespan. Thank God, now we know what to do. Focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. Must have been like a yoga instructor that wrote these. Limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats, reduce sodium intake. Fine. Shift to healthier food and beverage choices and support healthy eating patterns for all. That's going to solve the obesity epidemic once and for all. But each one of those statements it's actually a very pretty guide. It's nice. You can print out the different parts. It's all web-driven. It's nice. I don't know that it's going to accomplish very much. And we're getting to the end of these slides. Y'all know that they changed the nutrition facts label. And again, I think this is another very important change because they made the font for calories bigger. That's the main change. If they ask you what's new in the nutrition label, you can say they chose a bigger font for calories. They're listing actual amounts of vitamin D, calcium, potassium, iron. They're now listing added sugars. I like that. They're actually showing how much sugar is added to the foods, grams and percent daily value. Remember from yesterday, that's the percentage of calories that would be on a 2,000 calorie food plan. Vitamin A and C are no longer included. They don't think that that was relevant anymore. Calories from fat has been removed. I like that too. And then serving size is what people actually eat, not what's recommended. And if it's what's recommended, the Twinkie serving size should be 0 Twinkies. Right? But if they're selling you a 32-ounce soda, now the serving size has to be 32 ounces. There was a lot of discussion over that, thinking, well, are they really recommending that I drink 32 ounces? Well, they can't label that 6 servings anymore, right? So here's a sample of the old food label with the small font and the new food label with the big font. And you can see like all this gobbledygook at the bottom is gone. So you can see also the carbohydrate, 37 gram. Here it only says 1 gram of sugar. Here it says 37 grams. Total sugar, 12 grams, includes 10 grams added sugars. And I'm not sure if this is the same food. It doesn't look the same, but if it is, I think that's very revealing and very helpful, actually, just the focus on sugar. Aren't you happy they gave it the bigger font? Okay, in the last couple slides dealing with metabolism, I'm running out of time, so I'll go through these quickly. Basically, if you lose weight, your metabolism goes down. You don't lose weight and have your metabolism go up. As the car gets smaller, it burns less calories. And you can see on the next slide that this is how much the metabolism went down with weight loss, and you can see it went down more with low fat than with low carbohydrate. All right? Pounds lost study. This study was showing after weight loss. So this is weight loss at 6 months and then weight coming back up with different dietary patterns. They were all similar. But in a similar graph showing your metabolism at 6 months had dropped quite a bit. And by 2 years, it seems to have recovered. All right? New study is, metabolic adaptation. So in this study showing that you had metabolic adaptation wasn't seen anymore at 2 years, even though they still had some weight off. There's another study, metabolic adaptation. Maintenance of 10% reduction in body weight results in decreased energy expenditure by 20% decreased energy expenditure and improved skeletal muscle efficiency. So it takes less calories to do the same thing. Again, 10% weight loss lowers total energy expenditure by 20 or 25%. So I'm including that for your reference to look over. And if you haven't read it, Google the Biggest Loser contestant study. We have a whole talk on that later in this lecture series. But this study is showing that the total energy expenditure increased but remained below baseline. This was 16 people that had lost 40% of their body weight, right, at 5 months. And then they're looking at them 6 years later. What happened? All right? And let's see, I think I did a table. Yeah, I did a table. Let me get over to the table. So this is showing you that of the people at baseline, 150 kilograms at 30 weeks, 91 kilograms, almost 40% weight loss. And then here, 11% weight loss. And what's interesting, though, is at 6 years, their total energy expenditure is actually increased. But their RMR measured is still decreased by 30%. everybody says, well, they all regained all their weight, but in reality, they actually didn't do that bad. They kept 11% of their weight off, right? This is without medications. This is with that early intervention. So they did keep, at 6 years, 11% weight off. But this challenges the thought that if we lower our weight and keep it there, we're going to set up a new set point. This suggests that that's not true, that the body's always going to want to go back up, that our metabolism does not recover. So I've used up all my time. I thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this course. Thanks a lot.